This episode of the Matt Report is brought to you by Plugged In Radio. You can find out more at pluggedinradio.com. It's a new podcast that I have coming out, and it's all about WordPress plugins and maybe even the services around WordPress. But we're going to invite people on who create WordPress plugins to demonstrate, to teach us how to use these plugins that they create for our business, for our practice. You can find out more at pluggedinradio.com.
Welcome to the Matt Report, a podcast for building businesses with WordPress. Subscribe to the Matt Report at mattreport.com/subscribe. And now your host, Matt.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Matt Report. As always, your host, Matt, and today we have a great guest. We have Brad Williams of WebDevStudios on the call today, and we haven't spoke to him in 3 years on this show, and it's going to be a great sort of recap to see sort of where he was in business 3 years ago to where he is today. Now, he's doing projects with Microsoft and Discovery and just big, well-known brands. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what the differences were 3 years ago. You know, why wasn't he servicing those clients back then, and how did he get to them just a mere 3 years later, growing a team, and now launching a product business called Pluginize, of course, WordPress plugins, and just kind of figuring all that out. As the CEO, as the guy who doesn't even write a line of code anymore, what is that like? What's it like to run a business? What's it like to deal with these sort of larger clients that maybe some of you are aspiring to service in your own business? So real glad that Brad could join us 3 years later, and just going to be a great time. Once again, if you do love the show, we'd love a 5-star review. Head on over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review there. Where are you listening to the Matt Report? Are you listening to it on the web page, or are you downloading it to podcatchers? I'd love to know. If you head on over to the mattreport.com website and leave a comment maybe on this episode, or send me a contact form, anything like that, tweet at me at Matt Report. You can do that. Just let me know where you're listening to this. I want to know where it's most consumed. I will be launching, as you heard at the top of the show, a new podcast called Plugged In Radio. You can check that out, pluggedinradio.com. All right, it's been 1 minute and 43 seconds. Let's jump in to the episode. Joined by my good buddy, Brad. Brad, welcome back to the program, sir.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. 3 years later. It's cool. I'm not hurt at all.
Well, look, you are one guy that you just need that time off. We just need to get that good gap and then catch an update. So it has been 3 years. June 2013 was when I had you on, episode 40, and I was listening to it today, and all I could do was cringe listening to the way that podcast was back then, the way I answered questions or asked questions. But it's great to have you back. Thanks for taking the time out of your day.
I am glad to be back. I should have gave that episode a listen. It's been a while since I've heard it, but yeah, I think it's anything in life. If you go back and listen, if things aren't getting better, then that's probably a larger problem, right? So right. If your podcast is better now than it was, then I think you're going the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny that you say that. It's kind of a good entry point into this discussion about your business and about the business of WordPress. One of the things that I sort of I really don't even have a good way to phrase it. I try to come up with something creative someday. But I see a lot of folks in the WordPress space. They start off as freelancers, and they're like, you know what? I want to make a go at this. I want to start maybe like a small boutique agency, and they start doing the work. They start putting the time in, but they don't realize how difficult it is. But then there's the whole thing of, gee, am I doing things the right way? Well, look what WebDev's doing. Look what 10up's doing. Look what CrowdFavor's doing. Like, you start looking at all these people, and then you sort of give up. You sort of burn yourself out. You phase out. But folks who stay in it, who continue to work through the uphill battle, I mean, you are so much better than if you just gave up. I know it sounds stupid to say that. It's like so obvious, but it's like one of these things where you have it right in front of you. You're doing the work. Just stick with it. And, you're going to be better 6 months, a year from now, a day from now. You're going to be better than you are today, as long as you stick with it. And that's the worst thing people can do, is sort of give up short.
Yeah. It's funny too, because I'm sure we probably talked about this a bit on the last episode, because it was kind of the history of where WebDev started and how we kind of grew. But I don't know if this is the same path for a lot of people, but for us, we didn't have this long-term vision of we want to grow, or like look at a company and say we want to be like that size or like them. It was more of just, day in and day out doing the work, you know what I mean? And as the work grew, we started to grow just kind of organically. So it just kind of happened, you know what I mean? And I guess back then, this was 2008, 2009. There weren't a lot of larger WordPress, only shops. I think there's certainly a lot more freelancers and maybe, like you said, smaller person boutiques, smaller shops, but there weren't like these larger ones to kind of look up to and say, yeah, that's who we want to be. So it was kind of like we were just doing our thing and things started happening,
Yeah,
which
I think
worked out.
Yeah, I think that's the better way for me to phrase that. Is a lot of folks are just looking for more of that immediate, satisfaction, or hey, why don't I grow at X amount of, of employees and project size? It just simply takes time. Going back and listening to that episode 40, and of course I'll link that up in the show notes. You were, in a season of your business, what I'll call a season of your business, where it seemed like there was growth. I mean, there was definitely growth. You were working with big clients, but now just being on the homepage of your website, Microsoft, Discovery, Campbell's, Uber, take us through what has happened in the last 3 years, and what do you think is really getting you into these sort of enterprise clients? What has that been like, dealing with these types of clients, project size, scope, contracts, dollars, compared to 3 years ago? What's the biggest thing that you've discovered?
Yeah, I mean, great question. It's obviously a lot's changed in 3 years, which you would kind of expect. 3 years is kind of a long time. A lot of things have changed and some things have stayed the same, but certainly the clients, the names have gotten bigger, certainly the projects have gotten bigger. And I think a lot of it is really directly related to the growth of WordPress and kind of the acceptance of WordPress by, the enterprise, so to speak. Back in 2013, there was certainly WordPress was growing, and I don't remember the market share of WordPress back then, but I want to say it was probably
we actually said on the show 16 to 17%.
16, okay. I was going to guess low teens, so I was close. Yeah, so mid teens, and now we're over a quarter, over 25%. I think it's around 26 something. So it was popular. But at that time, it was just starting to creep into the enterprise space, these larger companies. And once it kind of broke through, once you see, companies like Microsoft kind of, rolling out a lot of sites on WordPress and really, enjoying working with WordPress and really kind of, just loving the platform. That one to me was a big one. Not only the fact that we were a part of it, but the fact that, a lot of other companies, they look at Microsoft. Microsoft isn't obviously like the big booming 90s company that we once remember that just dominated everything, but they still dominate a lot. And they're still a massive tech company. So a lot of people look, well, Microsoft's using this. Maybe we need to give this a serious look, So once, it's kind of like dominoes, once a few of those enterprise, large, massive companies kind of, took off with WordPress, I think it kind of validated it in a sense for others at that level to say, hey, Microsoft's doing it, why aren't we doing it? You know what I mean?
Sure.
That helped a lot. And just, that really for us started taking off like in, I would say 2014, when we really started seeing some of these larger brands reaching out to us and some of our, competitors in the industry looking to get into WordPress.
Sure. Well, I want to dive into being an agency owner. And one of the things that being in the game, as I call it, constantly, sticking through it and doing the work. As you talk to clients, you don't even have to land clients, and you can learn from them. So again, as I have a boutique shop, I come across every once in a while an enterprise-like client, one client that has much greater expectations to the service that they're going to get, and the way that they even present projects to us, I learn from that, right? I learn how they pitch projects to us. Mm-hmm. I learn sort of who's in charge, how they structure their teams. Even if I don't win the bid, I could go through a pre-sales interaction and go, wow, I'm gonna use that for my next client, right? Because I never knew that corporate thought this way, or I never knew that this type of business sort of had, this marketing team and engineering team sort of working together on things, and it sort of brightens or it gives me a little bit more experience to understand the higher end client. Is there one lesson you've learned from going to these bigger, badder companies, I guess, to put it in a different way? Have you learned one remarkable thing dealing with these larger clients?
I think probably the overarching thing that I see across the board is just understanding how larger corporations work. As opposed to a small business or smaller companies. Larger corporations, there is a much bigger hierarchy, kind of executive chain, and you have to kind of understand that because it's generally not one or two or three people making decisions. It's generally a lot of people making decisions, right? And that can sometimes be overwhelming. To an extent of you've kind of gone through whatever discovery phase scope of work and it kind of works its way up the chain and comes back down and everything's wrong and needs changed. In a sense, I think early on that might have been frustrating, but now going into it, it's like we kind of build that in knowing that when you're working with a larger corporation, enterprise level company, there is going to be a lot more overhead. There's going to be a lot more admin time that you have to spend working with those clients because of that kind of hierarchy or that, so many key players that have to buy into that, that plan and that project. Designs are another good example. You can imagine designs when there's a company of, 10, 15, 20 people, there's usually one or two people that are going to make those decisions. But when it's a company of 50,000 people,
Yes.
There's going to be a number of people that have to weigh in on that decision. There's going to be, not only following branding guidelines, but there has to be legal review. They have to make sure, the accessibility is at the forefront of everything you're doing because that's obviously a very important thing that everybody should be doing. But it also, from a legal standpoint, is extremely important for these companies. So there's just a lot of overhead, and I think you have to plan for that up front because if you don't, you're gonna probably lose your ass just on the overhead you didn't account for because you're thinking in smaller terms of, all right, this project's straightforward, but there's that overhead you didn't account for. So that's something I think we learned early on and have made sure to bake that into our plan so that we have that time and that budget allotted for that.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I'm doing a kitchen remodel. And listen, this isn't the Taj Mahal kitchen here. This is like, entry level. I'm walking into Home Depot. Like we're just getting some things changed around here. And it's funny, we get the quote and at the bottom of the quote, big red letters, it says, price will change if we run into problems. Price will change if customer changes decisions. Like all these like upfront things where if I tried doing that in our world, like the software world, and even like general small business marketing website world, they look at you and be like, well, you should know all the problems. You should know what's going to happen. And it's like, no, it doesn't exist. There's no way I can just do this 100% accurate, no problems at all, because 9 times out of 10, the problem comes from the customer changing their minds.
Yeah, I love that comparison. And it's one of I don't blog much, but it's one of those things I want to get back into. And it's one of those areas I would love to talk about because I feel like the overlap between what we do building websites and what, contractors do in that exact scenario, they are so similar. We're basically working with the client. In this case, it's you and your, and your wife and your kitchen is the project. And you want to revamp it. But there's no way that contractor can know what's going to happen. If they have to tear down your drywall, they're not going to know what's behind that drywall until they do it. I mean, if you ever watch HGTV or those DIY, my wife and I, we love those shows. We watch them on the weekend and stuff. There's always unknowns. There's always something that comes up. They tear it down, there's termites or there's mold or there's bad wiring or something that you would have no idea is there until you actually dig in. And you're not going to dig in until you have, a plan and you're getting paid, right? So it's exactly what we're doing in a sense. And you're right. For some reason, there's a lot of times there can be pushback on that, but it's a conversation we like to have. And I've used that analogy with clients before, of, hey, we're not going to know all the answers until we get in there. We can definitely give you a very good estimate, but once we get in there, we can really lock it in. You know what I mean? So.
Right.
It's a really interesting, there's a lot of parallels there. I think is really interesting.
Right. Yeah. And that could be one of the things, what I've found in sort of dealing with more corporate clients over the years and higher ed clients, that it becomes a people problem more than a technology problem. And it's not like person A doesn't get along with person B. It's just that once you're in, I don't know, the corporate atmosphere or even big business atmosphere, there's other variables at play where, you think that, you're dealing with a marketing team and all of a sudden big push. And then the marketing lead goes, well, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. And it's like, oh, I guess you don't care that much because it's not your business when you're used to dealing with small business clients and the owner is the decision maker and they're working 24/7 and they're ready to give you information. And then you start dealing with corporate stuff and people are just like, not my business. It's okay if we push this milestone out, that kind of thing.
There's a big difference between the two. Absolutely. When someone's writing you a check from their savings account versus submitting your invoice to accounting, those are two very different projects.
Sure.
That's one of the reasons we've kind of grown and moved away from those smaller projects. And when I say smaller, I'm talking in the thousands of dollars. And I'm not saying thousands of dollars is nothing. Like, I get it; it's a lot of money. But there is, if I'm writing a check for someone out of my savings account for a few $1,000s, I'm absolutely going to be on top of that and make sure I'm getting my money's worth, for whatever it is. And I don't blame them, but it's a very different working environment between those two types of projects.
Yeah. And people might be listening to this going, why are you asking these questions, Matt? Well, it's because, I see a whole bunch of stuff to keep the show clean. I see a whole bunch of stuff on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram of, marketing people who are like, hey, charge your clients $10,000 and live on an island kind of thing. And it drives me bonkers because number one, these folks, I can show you how to sell a 10-figure website too, but guess what? It's not pretty, right? It's not as easy as these marketers put it out there. And when you're a young, fresh entrepreneur, you're like, I want to get bigger projects. I want to get bigger clients. That doesn't mean that the check is just bigger, right? And that's the only thing that changes. No, the workload changes. The expectations change. Plenty of times people interview me and they say, how big is your team? And I say, it's 12 people. And they're like, can't deal with you. Too small, right? And they move on.
We've had that too. I mean, a lot of people think, they say, web dev is huge. And, we're 35 people now. So we're a decent sized company, but really outside of the WordPress space, we're not, you know what I mean? And I'm saying it's still within the web development community, but there are massive companies out there, and we've had clients in the past say you're too small, right? And I think that's probably surprising. Most people may not think that we hear that, but we do. And some of our competitors at the same size of us, I've talked with them, and they come across the same thing. They're looking for teams of hundreds of people or thousands even, to know that they have that level of support and resources. So it's not uncommon to hear that on the larger scale.
It's funny you say that because I think you said almost the exact same thing in episode 40.
Which you're never going to be big enough. That's the key point
here.
You will never be big enough to satisfy everybody, right? There's always going to be people that have very specific, in their mind and maybe their requirements. It doesn't mean you can't talk them out of that and prove that you are.
Sure.
But they might go into it with a certain, kind of set of expectations that you have to work to prove differently, prove otherwise.
Sure. One of the sort of figureheads on the internet, or what I'll call an internet celebrity, is Gary Vaynerchuk, and he started VaynerMedia. And you see the size that, again, he started small, whatever, and he had some successes before that, which sort of helped catapult him a little bit in the agency world. But if you follow any of his material that he puts out there, whether you agree or not, the amount of work that he puts in, I mean, he's still trying to compete against agencies, and he's trying to take down agencies and disrupt that model, and he's already got 600 employees, right? Like, how big do you need to be to compete in this world? It's pretty bizarre once you start to dive into it.
Yeah, and to that, like the size thing, right? Like that's something. There's been a lot of, joking in the community over the years, 10up's always hiring, WebDev's always hiring, whoever, Crowd Favorite's always hiring, and who's bigger and this and that. And like, honestly, like just being completely transparent, I used to get fixated on that. I used to want to say, we are the biggest, you know what I mean? And there was a time where we might have been for a short period of time, maybe not, who knows? But over the years, I've really kind of stepped back from that position and realize that it really isn't about being the biggest.